This week,
I'm preparing by dealing with you. You're tougher than all of them, right?
our exclusive interview with former President Trump from the campaign trail. A school bus mechanic warns of economic disaster if electric school buses become the norm. And the Supreme Court with some surprising new decisions the panel breaks down live. These stories and much more coming up this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stegall. And now let's meet our panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Josh Mann is our managing editor, Michael Ryan, our executive editor, and Jillian Schneider, staff writer at The Lion. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
This week we kick off with a big one. Had the opportunity, The Lion got exclusive access to Donald Trump on the campaign trail. He came to Philadelphia for another one of his rallies, and beforehand we went backstage and we talked with the former, and he hopes to be, future president of the United States on many issues, but one of them, close to all of us on the panel, is the issue of school choice. Let's take a lock.
Condoleezza Rice made some news saying that school choice was the civil rights imperative of our time, and I was curious what you thought about that.
Well, I'm a big fan of school choice. I think school choice is a great thing. I didn't realize she felt so strongly about it, but that's great that she does. School choice is a big deal, actually, and we're going to get it. We're also moving the Department of Education back to the states. You know, we're at the bottom of every list, except we spend more per pupil than any other country. And we're going to move it back. And I can't say all states because some won't do as good and some won't do very good at all because they'll run it like they run it anyway. You know who I'm talking about. But many of these states are going to do a phenomenal job. They'll be at the top of the list. So we're moving education back to the states. We'll do it for half the cost, less than half the cost, and we'll get a real education out of it.
So, Michael Ryan, your reaction to that? I think we kind of knew where he stood on this, but he's really been hammering this on the campaign trail. Detroit, Philadelphia, he's been going into unique places and delivering this message.
Yes, sir. And I must say that we must be a huge disappointment after what you had over the weekend. But, he is promising, former president is promising to abolish the Department of Education. And Charles Murray questioned whether you even need one, whether it's constitutional, what its track record is, and if there are really serious problems in education that only the federal government can take care of. But I just want to say something about the interview, and I commend it to our viewers and our listeners and readers to watch that interview because it's a good one. As a student of interviewing, and somebody who yells at the TV at all the stupid interviews, I must say that you did a great job. Your questions were pithy. You asked a question and then you shut up. And you covered a lot of ground in just a few minutes on all the issues, all the important issues. And that's something I don't think we're going to see in 90 minutes at the presidential debate. Yeah,
that's coming up as we tape this. That would be coming up in just about 24 hours or so. Jillian, I was curious as you saw that. He says, and thank you, Michael, by the way, I appreciate that. The reaction to doing away with the Department of Education, could he achieve that, or is that a pipe dream, Jillian?
It certainly is something that seems unprecedented, but I think something a lot of people may not know is that the Department of Education hasn't been around for very long. It was only established in the 1970s. So it's maybe 50 years old, 60 years old at this point. And most of what it does is honestly just move money around. It primarily just provides funding to the states, and the Office of Civil Rights will occasionally, hear cases about, if there's been discrimination, but states have their own Department of Education that does all of that already. And so having a federal Department of Education is kind of redundant, and we didn't have it for the first 200 years of our country's existence, and I don't know that it serves a great purpose now.
Josh Mann, political winner, tackling this issue, staying on this issue, as well as the Title IX stuff, which I addressed with him too. He's leaned into that. Do you think that's politically something that will benefit him?
Yeah, I don't know as much on the school choice thing. I think that's pretty 50-50, although parents certainly want school choice. I don't think it'll hurt them. The Title IX, though, I think is probably even a little bit better in terms of support. I think common sense folks realize you just can't have biological men competing against women. One of the things that Mr. Trump said that I thought was interesting is he was looking at how Americans fare versus other countries in terms of education. And he said, we're not near the top, not anywhere near the top, except in one category, and that's how much we spend per pupil. And it's something we've covered a lot at the Lion, that more spending does not necessarily generate better results. And I think President Trump wants to see more school choice, more competition, and kind of shake things up a little bit.
As we publish this episode this week, that will be the debate day, Thursday. So we'll be very interested to see, and you'll read plenty at readline.com, if in fact this issue of school choice in particular, Title IX, comes up. I know the team's going to be all over it, writing about the debate the very next day at readline.com. Let's move on to another biggie that came up this week. Jillian, the Supreme Court now is going to take up, and then this time next year, the Supreme Court will rule on the gender treatment of minors. Care to expound on that a little bit? What we could learn from that? What you're either hoping or anticipating we'll see out of that?
Yeah, so we're looking at, there's been a lot of states that have passed laws related to, the use of hormones or surgeries to treat gender dysphoria in minors. The Supreme Court is taking up Tennessee's law and the federal government decided to sue Tennessee and say that the law that basically says you can't do these sort of sex change procedures or treatments on minors, they claim that it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So I think certainly what we hope to see is an affirmation that these surgeries at the very least can be harmful, and obviously doctors and medical practitioners have a duty to first do no harm. And so the idea of giving a young child hormones that fundamentally change how their body works, or giving them major surgeries for to treat a mental illness is certainly something that can be harmful and is harmful. We've heard many stories of people who have had that done and regretted it severely. And so I hope to see the Supreme Court recognizing that it should not be legal to do such things, especially to children who don't aren't even old enough to buy cigarettes yet or alcohol. They shouldn't be able to do that.
Michael, for Supreme Court watchers, it's been very interesting. They have, in a couple of cases now, high-profile cases this week, they just said on the government and social media, states don't have standing to sue. They just came out with that this week. Of course, they also ruled on the mifepristone, the abortion pill through the mail. They kind of punted on that. I don't know. I'm certainly not going to predict. But given these two rulings, how do you think they'll come down next year on this one versus Tennessee?
Well, maybe a couple hours ago I would have given you a different answer. But as we talk here today, the Supreme Court threw out the case, started Missouri v. Biden, now Murphy v. Missouri, on the censorship of conservatives online. The court ruled that the states didn't have standing, as you say. So I wouldn't make any predictions about what this court may do. But the court is taking up this issue because it's all over the map, across the country. Different district courts and appellate courts have ruled different ways on different laws. Half the states have passed some kind of law on this. So there's an urgency to this issue that the court needs to pick up. The media call it banning gender-affirming care for minors. It all depends on how you look at it. You could call it sex changes for minors. And certainly it happens before the body is even fully installing the biological sex of the person involved. It's alarming to me, last thing, that nobody really in the public square has described the surgeries involved in some of these things. I invite readers and listeners to look at what's involved in phalloplasty and vaginoplasty. It seems awfully experimental, especially to do on kids.
Yeah, it's awful. And gender-affirming care is a made-up term by the media, as you say. It's gender-denying care is what it should be called. But Josh Mann, these are surprising, I think, from a court that many people call a conservative court. You have Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh siding with the other three. For a majority ruling against the idea that states can get involved and defend citizens from being censored on social media. Now, again, they didn't rule in favor of censorship with the government colluding, but they said states can't represent their citizens in this fight, which I found kind of shocking, but that could lead to other rulings, I would guess, similar.
Yeah, and in the dissent, Justice Alito talked about how important this case is for free speech. It's one of the most important the court has seen, and he worries that the court is shirking its duty. These are his words, in not taking up the case. And in fact, he feels like there was standing, at least for one of the plaintiffs in the case. It was 2 state attorneys general and 5 social media users as part of the case. So he didn't even see that the standing was an insurmountable problem. But he also recognized, and I think this is what worries most observers, is what kind of power this potentially could not give the government, but allow the government to continue to abuse. And I think that's really concerning.
And the states, I guess, not being allowed to sue on this one, I'll just ask Michael quickly, do you think then that citizens then ought to get involved, team up with, I don't know, some of these free legal services that are out there and take it again, try to get to the court again and say, all right, well, if you states can't do it, then I as a citizen am going to do it.
Absolutely. And it's a little confusing about the future of this case. It sure looks like it was a dismissal, that the judge is being told to dismiss the case by the Supreme Court. But I talked to another attorney who said that, no, we have the chance now at the district court level to establish standing, which you would think would have been done ahead of time. The real impact of this decision today by the court to, in my mind, throw the case out for lack of standing is it changes the rules for this election year online. It wipes away any prohibition of the Biden administration to censor conservatives online. So it's fair game.
Yeah, and you can already see the Associated Press framed it as a win for Biden, which I found very telling. They think the Supreme Court throwing this out on standing is a win for Biden. I don't understand how you see it that way. They simply said the states can't sue over this, effectively is what they said. Not that it's a win for the government to censor us, but anyway, we move on to the editors of Scientific American demanding more study and scrutiny, Josh Mann, on homeschooling. You're a homeschool dad. You need investigating, the Scientific American says, I guess?
Apparently so. This is one more attempt. We've seen this a number of times where somebody worries because there are a few bad apples in every batch of whatever that then there's a problem and we need more regulation. The government needs to get involved. And, most homeschool families I've ever been around would say, no, thank you. You can stay out of our lives. That's oftentimes why people homeschool. Private schools feel the same way. And in fact, I even know people in public schools that, not unlike what we discussed with Donald Trump and the abolishment of the Department of Education, people in public schools, they want the federal government out. Sometimes they even want the state government out. They want local control. Carrie McDonald, who's kind of a micro school guru and expert in alternative education, said that these editors of the Scientific American have joined, quote, the crowd of busybodies eager to constrain a family's right to raise and educate their children how they choose. I couldn't agree more.
Let's turn, Jillian, to the story of school bus mechanic out there, a story that Sean Z., your colleague, has written about. School bus mechanic saying if we go electric on school buses nationwide, it will be an economic disaster. Tell us more.
Right. So Sean Z interviewed a gentleman who I believe lives and works in Colorado Springs as a school bus mechanic, and he just detailed for her a laundry list of potential mechanical and, just kind of practical problems that school buses might have. One of those was that these electric batteries have to stay at a certain temperature. And so you can imagine in Colorado, that's challenging where it can get very cold and the altitude can affect the function of the electric motor as well. And so he actually has to have heaters installed, diesel heaters on the school bus to keep the battery warm. And he's heard of states like Arizona that get really hot having to have air conditioning for the batteries. So it's just all sorts of things like this that you wouldn't necessarily think of, but problems that school bus drivers might have about not being able to get their batteries charged fast enough during the middle of the day and then being stranded when they're out in the afternoon, and all sorts of problems with these, the mandates that the Biden administration of trying to push electric school buses on districts. And it really shows that this is agenda driven, and it's really not a practical policy solution. It's these politicians who are saying, oh, well, we want to save the environment and that's our agenda, so we're going to just push this policy and do funding for this, even though nobody actually sat down to think about the practicality of well, how is this going to work? Will the batteries be charged? And all of these really kind of basic questions that need to be answered in order to make a solution effective and not just idealistic.
Yeah, most of the country that goes into sub-zero temperatures in the winter, I think of all the buses that you see at what they call the bus barn or the bus warehouses where they all sit and wait. I think about sub-zero temperatures and battery-powered buses sitting out. Anyway, that goes without saying. Michael Ryan in New Hampshire, another story of teachers secretly shepherding. We've heard this with the transgender stuff before. Now we hear it about abortion. Again, another story of another teacher keeping something really important from a parent.
Well, yeah, you would think so. And I read that story at readlion.com, and I say to myself, what if this teacher had taken secretly, without the parents' knowledge, taken the kid to church? That would have been a real scandal, right? There's a good chance, on a serious note, that taking a young teen, to an abortion might be covering up a crime of sexual assault or underage sex by an adult. And so you got to be wondering about the backstory here.
Josh Mann, taking a student to an abortion without the parents' knowledge. I mean, this is, it used to be, we were talking about could teachers bring treats to school for peanut allergies. Now we're taking kids to have abortions?
Yeah, this teacher was a teacher at a special needs school and apparently reportedly lied, saying she had food poisoning, wasn't going to be able to make it to work, then takes a student to an abortion clinic. They had pre-planned this. They'd been in discussions about this. And to my knowledge, the way that this came to light was somebody wrote an op-ed citing this generic example of something that happened, and then a couple of reporters started to dig into it a little bit, and there was a Freedom of Information request and some redacted document that basically confirmed this teacher had been accused of that. Funny enough, and it's not funny, this teacher has since been hired at another school district.
Good grief.
Apparently didn't know about it, and so we don't know yet whether their job's up in the air. But the teacher hasn't been identified out of concerns for the identity of this minor.
Wow. We started at the top of the show, Jillian, talking about censorship, government colluding with social media to keep people quiet on social media or keep their views quiet. Now in New York, there's a school district. Parents are suing. Explain.
Yes, so there's a school district in New York, and this district has imposed what they're calling is quote-unquote speech codes. And it's kind of full of your very boilerplate language about, not bullying and that sort of thing. But students of this district have reported that because of the kind of political leaning of the district, conservative students are afraid to talk about their views on immigration or abortion. There's questions about, being forced to use a transgender student or teacher's pronouns, even if that's not what the conservative students believe. And so the parents have brought this lawsuit because they feel like their students are self-censoring and effectively having their rights being violated. And the story, or the part of the story that really shocked me, was the district's response to this lawsuit. What they said in a public statement was, they defended their speech codes, and they said that speech that is harmful to students is not welcome in our schools and does not align with our beliefs as a school district. We are proud that there is no place in our schools for hurtful and hateful rhetoric. And so essentially they're saying is, yes, we're censoring your students, and yes, we're proud of it.
Amazing. These stories, all of these stories, and so many more at readline.com. Before we close, we always like to go around the horn and ask our team what their favorite story of the week is. Josh Mann, we'll start with you.
Well, this e-bus story by Sean Z I thought was an excellent example of reporting, original reporting at the Lion. Talking to a school bus mechanic is just, okay, here are the regulations. Now, how will this impact you? And he points out all of the things that once you read it, you say, well, those seem like obvious hurdles. And I think this is not unusual to see the government hand down regulations that have not completely considered all of the ramifications.
And the cost. That's going to be a fortune. Jillian, your favorite this week?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in school choice, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry just signed their universal school choice program into existence. We've officially passed 1 million students participating in school choice programs nationwide, which is really exciting. And as there's more programs that are growing a ton, I'm sure that number is just going to grow exponentially. And then Condoleezza Rice went on record in support of school choice as well. So there's a lot of wins in that category.
Boy, that was a big moment. Condoleezza Rice, beautiful monologue on school choice and the importance of it. I commend that to people if they've not seen it. Michael Ryan, your favorite of the week?
Well, my favorite, not because I like it, is the ruling by the Supreme Court just before we went on.
Yeah.
6-3 that the states don't have the standing to sue the federal government for censoring conservatives online. I've been covering that story for several years because it originated in Louisiana and Missouri. And it's the decision today, though on a technicality, is right up there for me with the overturn of Roe and the approval of Obamacare for sheer stun factor.
It is a stunner. It really is. It's not one that anybody saw coming, but I know you guys will continue to cover it. And that'll do it for this week's edition of the Lion Week in Review. For all the news, breaking and otherwise, check out readlion.com. I hope that you will. That interview with Trump is also up there, too, if you're interested in seeing that. And for all of us at the Lion, until next time, thanks for downloading the show.